This week's focus, we're very excited to be taking a look at a couple different aspects of data, not only data quality control and assurance, but also submission to a wonderful data portal, the SDG 14.3.1 portal. So we're very glad to be joined by Dr. Adrienne Sutton and Dr. Katherina Schoo today, or this evening, depending on where you are. Just some housekeeping. We'll have most of our videos off today, just to save bandwidth. And so if you can keep yours off as well when you join, that would be wonderful. Feel free to unmute or raise your hand now as we get going. And with that, I think we'll kick us off. Perhaps with some module 4 questions. So I'll first pose the first one to Katherina. Well, first, do you two want to provide introductions? I'm sorry. We can let you share a little bit of information about yourself.
Sure, I'd be happy to. I'm Katherina Schoo. I am a biological oceanographer by training, and I have I've done my bachelor's in Edinburgh, moved to New Zealand for my master's, and then did my PhD in Germany at the Alfred Wegener Institute. And for the last 4 years, I've worked at the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission of UNESCO here in Paris, where I'm mainly working on ocean acidification related programs. So I'm one of the people in charge of this SDG 14.3.1 indicator and the whole data collection process. And I'm also part of the GOA on distributed secretariat. So I kind of like sit on both chairs, which is a really comfortable position to be in because it allows me to be in contact with a lot of people, a lot of very interesting people. So I'm excited about this course. I've also been basically trying to build this course. So if there's any issues, I'm the one to blame, mostly.
We are so appreciative of all of your work on this. It's been really wonderful, all the effort you've put into and gathering all the lectures together and creating it. And of course, working on this in particular. So thank you so much for joining us today. We'll start off with a question from the discussion board. Curious to hear a little bit more about the countries in Oceania that are reporting to the SDG data portal in the last couple of years. Can you share a little bit of information about who's been active?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been, so I looked into that. The Oceania is based in this case on how the United Nations basically define geographical regions. And the ones that we have been getting data from since the very beginning. So just to look back, as you've seen in the lecture, this indicator has been active, if you like, since 2018. The first data collection tentatively occurred in that year, but we've only really been getting data for the last 3 years. So the first call basically went out in 2019 for the data submission to the United Nations in 2020. So we always try to have a few months between the call and our actual deadline, which is always in February. And then we've done that 2019 to 2020, and then the next 2 years. So this is year 3 that I've just sent off 2 weeks ago. So I'm still slightly buzzing from that. But the countries that have been the most faithful from the very beginning have been in Oceania, Australia, New Zealand, and Fiji. So thank you and congratulations, because that was amazing. We were so thrilled to suddenly be getting some really good data sets from countries that we'd hoped for, but we are aware that it is a process that takes quite a lot of work, and we've had some issues. We've had very many very good and very patient questions from submitters. We've been in contact with Katie from Fiji. We've emailed back and forth a little bit about the submission process, and I'd be happy to talk more on that as well if there's any more questions on that.
No, it's really wonderful. I think following along with that, someone was curious if Fiji has been actively involved in data submission towards this goal. And I think you mentioned, they're one of the countries that recently submitted. We have around 90 participants from Fiji in this course right now. So hopefully we'll be seeing some more data from Fiji soon, but can you elaborate a little bit on what you've seen perhaps?
So we've seen, excuse me while I just go through my data set. We have had data from Suva Reef and Fiji. This, I think, was one of our very first data sets that we received from that country. And we've been lucky that we got Fiji data in, I think, 2 of the 3 years that we've had data collections now. And the way that you can do the data submissions is either through the SDG 14.3.1 data portal, or if that doesn't work, and I know it's quite tricky, if that doesn't work, then we're absolutely happy to just receive your data sets via email as well. So don't hesitate to reach out to us if there's any questions at all as to why something might not work. And because this is like an online data submission system, it's a bit fidgety sometimes. So sometimes it's tiny, teeny issues, as in the data, like the date isn't formatted perfectly. So, you know, it can be quite, it's quite a hurdle sometimes, because it can be such a tiny little thing, such a tiny little detail. And if you've worked for months and months and years in many cases on setting up your data observations and your ocean acidification observations, and we all know that is tricky, and then having to format the data in a very specific manner and filling out this metadata form template as well, that's a big ask from anybody, and we're very much aware of that. We're hoping to simplify things a little bit in the next few months, but this data template and everything is available on the SDG 14.3.1 data portal. And as I said, any questions, please feel free to just email us. We also have a little FAQ section on that website, where some of the questions that we've come across most frequently, as the title says, have been collected, and we've tried to answer them. So that's our first, kind of like the first step I would recommend. And then just email me, please. I'm more than happy to assist with anything.
Great, thank you so much for sharing that. I'll pass it over to Meredith for the next couple of questions.
Thanks, Caitlin. And for those of you who did not make it to the first session in the live Q&A, I'm Meredith Kurz. I'm in the NOAA Research Office of International Activities, and I support our ocean acidification program with this project. And it's my favorite project to support. So we have a couple of extra questions for Katherina. We're waiting for Adrienne's audio to work itself out. But there are some really cool questions here. And I think a lot of the people who are training during our course are interested in the long run and being submitters of SDG 14 data. And that's one of our big goals, right? So what would you say are some of the barriers to submitting data for SDG 14, the common obstacles that people run into? And a related question is, how do you get in contact with your country's focal point?
I'm glad you asked, because the second question is sort of like one of the answers to the first question in a way. So what we've realized is this is a huge undertaking. Collecting data like on a global scale on ocean acidification has never been done before. So we started off this whole process while we were writing this methodology, with the support from Go On and a lot of the other experts in the field of ocean acidification, many of which are lecturers in this course as well. We started sort of reaching out to both these experts and to other researchers that we'd met through these networks like Go On, and asked them if they knew, who their data person, their data agency, the national focal point was in their country. And we realized that it's one of the hurdles is infrastructure and communication. So there's a hurdle in that as a United Nations agency, the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission goes through these focal points, which are in a way the ambassadors of these nations at the IOC of UNESCO. And there sometimes these letters stop, because there is sometimes just not an awareness of who's doing what in which country. So we try to work against that, in that we've done webinars in the last few months for focusing on the National Oceanographic Data Centers, National Statistical Offices, and quite often these sit in the Fisheries Ministry or in the Ministry for Agriculture, interestingly enough, or the Environmental Agency, or finding them can be a bit difficult, but we have, again, on the SDG 14.3.1 data portal, in the FAQ section, we've linked all of those data centers. So the IODE of UNESCO, the data center of UNESCO, basically, if you like, they have a full address book of the of all of these associated data units, National Oceanographic Data Centers, focal points, any possible point of contact for the researchers linked on their portal. So that's already a first step for getting in touch. One of the big hurdles, as I was saying, is that this is a very specific data format that we're asking for. So data submissions in this case means an Excel sheet with the actual data in a specific format and metadata. And the metadata to us is very necessary because it allows us to do first data quality assessments. So this is a little bit, if you like, the metadata is a bit like an extension of your lab book, is how I like to look at it, because you note down everything that you do while you do the observations. So you note down what the frequency of your calibration is, which instruments you've been using, which methodology you've been using, like which of the SOPs you've used, where in which paper you found this methodology, what you've changed about it, what your temperature was, what your salinity was. All of these very, very necessary things that you need to know anyways in order to be able to use this data for publications or to make any sense of it and to assure the quality of it. Those things are all part of that metadata. But we are aware that it takes quite a lot of time to format the data into this very specific way, in this very specific sheet. And so that is, we know, a big ask. The good thing is, though, that once you've done it, it's fairly easy to just like change one or two things. And you can submit several data sets with the same metadata file. So if you go back to the same place all the time and you always use your same equipment, that is perfectly fine. And you don't need to change anything apart from the submission date, maybe, or the name of the submitter or one of the investigators. But it is, I think that is a bit of a hurdle. And then I think there's a certain hesitancy sometimes that people don't think the data might be like good enough, which I would encourage you, please also use this data submission as a way to highlight what you're doing. This is a global platform where we can showcase that you as a researcher and your country are contributing to this global effort. And so send us anything you have. We will highlight the fact that you have this data, that you are doing this research, that you are doing these observations. And in a way, what we've been told by a few researchers who've been working with for the past few years, this is also for them very useful to be able to highlight, when they're doing new research, writing new research grants, or they're looking for new funding, to be able to say, but our data is already in the SDG 14.3.1 data portal, is very beneficial. So we're hoping, I'm just seeing that there's a question in the chat, we're hoping that this information will be mainstreamed in the policies of the countries. So it is a way that we as the IOC showed this data to the United Nations. It then becomes part of the UNFCCC process. So COP26, for example, had a lot of ocean acidification talks, which were held by our networks as well. And so we do hope that this is something that's going to become actually part of policy in every country, that is going to become part of a more practical, but it's going to have practical uses rather than just being this data that sits somewhere and it's just like this abstract number, that it's also one of the reasons why we very much encourage you to send us the data, because then it becomes part of this big process. And also to enable you to do long-term observations, because that is what we really need. We do need sustained observations, and we do need this to be of a known quality. So following the SDG methodology to make it comparable across all countries, so that we can see what's happening where and at what rate. So I hope I answered the question there. That was a bit of a long one.
No, that's excellent. I think your point about, all data is, data that should be submitted, right? With, some quality control, some looking at it. But as someone who's worked on, meta-analyses on oceanification data, it's amazing just what you can do when you take little bits of information here, little bits of information from there, and put it together. You start to see like the much bigger picture. And I think that's also true for monitoring data as well, right? All the data from different geographies put together starts to contribute something that's really exciting.
Yeah, that's what we're hoping for. And we're also adding it to the Goa On, that's like sort of a semi-secret project. The Goa On Data Explorer, you might have all seen. We're adding an extra like layer to that, where we're showing all of the data points that we have. So basically it's going to be a map. There's going to be all the dots from all the different stations. And then that'll allow people to see where we have data from, what the data says. We're still in the developing stages, but the aim is to then have that be able to link back to the SDG portal as well.
That's
so
exciting to hear.
We're trying to just get all of that information out there and make it as accessible as possible, so that really people are aware of what's happening.
Thank you. I'm really thrilled to hear that. I think your point about the metadata template sort of leads us into some of the work that Dr. Sutton presented on. So Adrienne, if you'd like to introduce yourself, and then we can toss a couple of questions your way. We'll still be having challenges getting online. Okay, pop in when you can, but we can go back to Katherina. We have a couple of other questions lined up. I think there's one in the chat. Again, what are procedures to be taken to mainstream this idea of oceanification into every sector in the country to understand the importance of it? I think, this gets into the idea of, long-term impacts of oceanification. How do we bridge that into other areas of society? Not only those of us who are really passionate about the ocean, but help others understand too, what are some of the implications that we may not be thinking of in terms of sociocultural implications or, the broader economy.
Those are all very good questions. Yeah, they're quite difficult to answer. I'm sure Meredith knows this as well. It is very difficult because sometimes it feels like we're in a bit of a bubble, and that we're always talking to the same people, we're always talking amongst ourselves. One big opportunity I see to sort of mainstream this and make it more, to raise awareness outside of just like the ocean science sector in a way, is through the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, which the Goa On led program, OARS, Ocean Acidification Research for Sustainability. I'll drop the links in the chat in a minute for everything. This is one of the, so this is a big program. It's a 10-year program because it is a decade program, obviously, for the UN Decade of Ocean Science. And one of the 7 outcomes that we've planned as like sort of a roadmap for the actions we want to take in the next 10 years. And there are actions in there as well that aim at increasing ocean literacy, by which we often mean just the awareness of what the ocean is and what is wrong with it, kind of like where it's at, why we need a healthy ocean, why everybody needs a healthy ocean, not just if your livelihood depends on it, but also the ocean influences the global climate to in a way that is just recently being understood, like in the last 5-10 years. And if you look at all of the big publications that have come out recently in science world as like the International Panel for Climate Change, the IPCC report that came out last week, I think we counted over 200 mentions of the words ocean acidification. So it is becoming something that we're more and more aware of, that if the ocean is unhealthy, and ocean acidification is only one of the stresses that is currently acting on the ocean, right? There's obviously ocean warming, there's deoxygenation, there's pollution, there's overfishing, there's eutrophication. There's a lot of stresses that whose effects, when they combine, are bigger than the sum of their parts. And so there's an increased awareness, not just for ocean acidification, but for multiple ocean stresses, that they are crucially important to understand and to follow. And so just to take that back again, this OARS program from Go On is aiming through the lens of ocean acidification to raise awareness for that. So we're also hoping to have, like, one of the outcomes also works on policy plans. So getting this to local and regional governments, to national governments, and not just on the sort of like the IPCC and UNFCCC COP levels, at the very high levels, where it's crucially important that it also be, but to also have help develop tools for more regional action plans. And we also have the our partners from the International Alliance for Ocean Acidification, Jesse Turner, for example, who have done great jobs on that. There's the Commonwealth Blue Charter Ocean Acidification Group, which also has a fantastic booklet that gives very, very good information on how to approach this and how to, as you know, a researcher, get action plans, to get action from governments, from agencies. So there's a lot of material out there, luckily, that has been developed by some very able people in the last few years. And that is, I agree, it's a very important goal that we should never lose focus of. Again, a very long answer. I'm apologizing. It's late at night for me, so I just tend to go off here.
Wonderful information. Thank you so much. I think we'll turn it over to Dr. Sutton now. Would you like to introduce yourself? I'd still be having challenges.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Yeah, I've never quite had these challenges with Zoom before. I've had my Zoom challenges, but this is really over and beyond.
Zoom gives us lots of presents in terms of unexpected challenges all the time. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah. The last audio I heard what just cut out in and out a little bit.
We can hear you now.
Okay. And you asked me to introduce myself. Is that what I'm doing?
Thank you.
Yeah. I'm Adrienne Sutton. I am an oceanographer at NOAA's Pacific Marine Environmental Lab in Seattle, Washington, in the US. And I run a program of autonomous observations of air, sea, CO2, and ocean acidification and biogeochemistry on platforms like buoys and uncrewed surface vehicles.
Great. Thank you again for joining us. I know you have this module as well as another one coming up. So participants are fortunate enough to hear from you twice during this course. So thank you for that. We have a couple of questions in the discussion forum we can start off with. One perhaps is a little involved. It just asks, could the QC technique for comparison to independent data be explained again? I think in your slides you show a couple different ways to compare measurements to other data sources, like other calculated carbonate parameters or past data or other data synthesis products. Could you share a little bit more detail on the process of doing that? Okay, so she might join us again.
I can keep talking in the meantime. Because there was a question related to how to actually do the data submission. And Caitlin and I talked about that before. There's we did a webinar for the Go On webinar series. So Kirsten Isensee and myself did that, and I'm going to drop the link in here, and Caitlin's also going to share that link with the group. We are in the process of changing the data portal a little bit, so I didn't want to include this in the course at the moment because it's going to look different in a few months. But if you do want the information, and if you are currently looking at submitting data that you already have, then I recommend you look at that, you watch that webinar, and I think the link should be in the, yeah, I'll just drop the link in the chat box. So that's, again, a similar introduction into what is this SDG indicator, why do we need it, why, how did it come about? And then a step-by-step sort of like formatting of the data sets and submitting it to the SDG data portal online. And again, if you have any questions on that, my email address is somewhere in this course as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing more about that. Since we have Katie Salafi on the line, those of you who are in the course are familiar with her work. She presented on a number of great resources last week, but Katie's also been involved in some data collection in Fiji, and perhaps she can share a bit more about her experiences uploading data and any other tips or tricks that she can share too.
Thank you, everybody. I'm using my phone to for internet, so if I have issues, I might just drop out, like Adrienne is going through right now. Is my video actually on the side? Should I just turn it off? Is that okay? Best to get rid of the camera. Okay, so thank you so much for the opportunity. Just very briefly on our own experiences. So we did collect about a year's, almost two, a year and a half worth of data set in 2019 and just very the first few months of 2020 before COVID stopped all the work. And it was a mixture of, some of it was using ISAMI to do a series of a time series, and some of it was discrete water samples collected once a month for more than a year. And basically for the submission, Katherina actually reached out to us. There was an email that was sent out to all global, I suppose, focal points or people who are collecting data, maybe through her contacts. She found out that we were doing some collections, so we got it. And so we reached out to her on how best we can actually do this data submission. And, I just wanted to highlight something that Katherina has mentioned in terms of, even if you feel like your data is not good enough, just reach out and they can probably help you sort it out, or they can help you find a way to bring up the quality, or just submitting it also so that people are aware of what you are doing and that you are trying to work in that space, and they might be able to reach out and help you. And so that's basically what we did. We started working with Katherina. We worked with a peer mentor who was my peer mentor when I was teaching at USP and trying to set up the ocean acidification program. So through her help, we went through the data, tried to just look through the data and try to bring it up to a bit of a standard where we can actually submit it. And yeah, a few back and forth with the peer mentor and also with Katherina, and then we submitted the data, which was for the northern part of northwest of Fiji. It was actually Vitilevu Bay. And also Antoine, just wanted to highlight that Antoine has also been doing some data collections, and he also submitted data for Fiji. So that's kind of how we did the submission. In terms of a focal point, I mean, Katherina would probably know like the process in terms of how it's all submitted. But when that email came to us, we were like, oh, so who's the focal point for Fiji? So we started contacting like the Ministry of Economy and tried to talk to their climate change division. And then we talked to the Ministry of IAD, I think it's the people dealing with med services. So we reached out to them as well. We reached out to fisheries. So they were like, wasn't a clear group or focal point for the country where we could actually do the submission from. And so we just reached out to the Ministry of Economy, and they said, yeah, just go ahead and do the submission. And that's what we did. So again, at the country level, I think there needs to be the infrastructure needs to be set up as well, and that's something that's still challenging perhaps in many countries. And you know, I'm sure in the coming years, as ocean acidification becomes an issue that a lot of people are aware of, I'm sure that we'll have more. The focal points will be set up properly. And we also need all of you that are in training at the moment to help set up those focal points in your countries, because who knows, you might be that focal point that we actually need to move this forward a bit. I think I'll stop there for now. Yeah, thank you.
That's such a great message. Thank you. I very much appreciate that, Katie. That was great. I also very much appreciate that you reached out and, like you said, that we were able to work through this together, because it is a bit complicated. And I'd just like to add that if you're not entirely sure who your focal point is, that if you just let us know about that as well, then we're more than happy. We have several, because there is a bit of an issue from our side as well, that we sometimes have the feeling the focal points don't know who's doing the research in their country, that if people submit data sets to us, regardless of whether it is through the focal point or through the other agencies, we go back to those agencies. So we use all of our, I'd say phone books, but you know what I mean? Like, we use all of our official contacts to find out who the focal point is, to establish that contact with the researchers. And also, because this is it's a national data submission, so these need to be approved by the agency in charge in that country. So if you cannot find your agency or your focal point or whichever, then please just drop us a note saying that there is an issue there, and then we will do that work for you. So we will reach out to them, we will find out who they are, and then let you know as well once we have established who they are, so that next time there's not such an issue with this. Did you get something? Katie?
I hear you. My internet's being a little bit through. Am I coming through okay?
There you are.
Oh, am I coming through okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. My internet was being a little slow for a minute too. But thank you, Katie and Katherina, for that great little conversation. I think that was really informative. And since we have 20 minutes left, it would be good to see if we can get a couple QC questions into Adrienne. But can you hear us, Adrienne?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. All right.
Great.
Let's give it a shot.
Abandoned my government computer and went to my phone. So here we are.
Oh boy. I've done that too. So did you hear the previous question? It was asking you to revisit. Okay. We were asking you to revisit the QC technique for comparison to independent data that you were speaking about in the module. If you could explain that in a slightly different way for the audience.
Sure. I heard someone who just spoke previously about collecting ISAMI data and also going out and collecting discrete bottle sample data. And so that's a great example of independent data where you have a sensor measuring seawater pH and you're going out collecting bottle samples and measuring pH and alkalinity, or maybe another parameter in those bottle samples using a different method. So that's independent data. Not everyone, has access to a variety of measurement techniques like that. So another way to look at your data set in comparison to another is by using one of the data products that are available. So there's global water column data that's available via a product that's called GLODAP. And there's surface ocean CO2 data available with a data product called SOCAT. And then from those two different data products, there's a whole suite of other products that have been developed from those that that can provide the whole carbon system of parameters. So DIC, alkalinity, CO2, pH, and what I'm thinking of is called Canyon B, but there's just a lot of those out there. And the GLODAP and SOCAT websites, you'll be able to find out how to get access to one of those data products or how to get access to others that use those data sets. And from those data sets, you can do a lot of things. You can construct a climatology for the region in which you're sampling. So if you have a pH sensor and you don't have any other independent data, you could look at one of those data products and see what they estimate a monthly climatology to be for that site. And if your sensor data is wildly different in terms of seasonality or in terms of the range of measurements, that's, that would, say you need to maybe look into those data a little bit more. Another way that you can construct climatologies is with past data. So if you have a time series that you've collected over a number of years, and you're wondering whether your 2017 data are okay or not, you can also use your past data as a guide. Does the 2017 data have the same seasonal cycle? Does it have similar patterns to those past data? That's another way to look at your data sets in comparison to others.
Great. And one of our questions relates to this, and they asked if you could elaborate more about how QC techniques can be used to detect flaws in data. And you did touch on that, but would you want to add anything to that, given that it was an FAQ?
Sure. I mean, there's a lot of QC techniques, and every single data set is different. And you have, because you are the person collecting data in that region, you know that region more than anyone else, and you should know your data better than anyone else. And so you will want to develop your own procedures for QC that make sense for your data. So a couple of examples that I shared in the lecture were, that comparison to independent data, which we talked about. You can also do a statistical assessment of outliers. So, you, depending on your data, you would want to define outliers maybe a little bit differently, depending if you're in a very variable estuary versus an open ocean system. An outlier may be 5 times the standard deviation or 3. That's something that you have to figure out when looking at your data. If you have a series of data in a region over a number of years, then you can start to get a sense for what the normal range is within a region. And so doing a range test, if pH is higher than 8.2 or lower than 7.8, I know it's bad, because that's just, not something that you've seen, or is wildly outside of the range that you believe is in that area. You can also, another thing that I talked about in the lecture with regards to comparing to independent data, if you are, for example, if you have an iSAMI that's collecting pH, and maybe you have one of the SAMIs that are also measuring CO2, then you have 2 parameters that you're measuring. If you suspect your pH is bad, or the sensor, there's a section of the time series of the pH sensor that you think looks bad, you could estimate alkalinity in your region using an algorithm that's based primarily on temperature and salinity. And there's a product out there that's called LIAR, LIAR, that you can use to estimate alkalinity in your region. So now you have another carbon parameter, and you can use alkalinity and CO2 to estimate pH, and you can compare that estimated pH to your measured pH. So there are lots of different techniques, and they all, depending on how much data you're collecting, when and where, you will want a different combination of those QC techniques.
Great, thanks for those examples. I think they were really helpful and specific, and I hope that folks can employ those in their work. And then a related, moving from QC to QA. How would you share some examples about how QA could be applied before raw data is collected? That was another one of the questions that we got on the forum.
Yeah, for that one, there's a lot of resources out there. So quality assurance is basically following a standard operating procedure. And within those standard operating procedures, there are techniques that will help you identify whether your measurement is accurate or precise. Like, for example, if you're collecting discrete measurements, using a certified reference material, you can see what the accuracy of your measurement is compared to how you're measuring how far off of that certified reference material you are. When you collect bottle samples, you should also be doing repeated measurements on each sample. So if you're doing 3 measurements on a sample and all 3 measurements are wildly off from one another, you know that there's something wrong with your measurement technique. So those kind of approaches are detailed in a few of the resources I provided in the lecture. So one is a guide to best practices for ocean carbon measurements. That's by Andrew Dixon et al. The Go On in a Box kit resources give you some of those tools as well. And then the SDG 14.3.1 methodology also has some good tips on that. And yeah, in terms of autonomous sensors, there should be some resources out there and from the manufacturer. So the manufacturer may have sampling or sensor handling protocols. You know, you have to read the manual of the sensor before you go out and turn it on and follow all the protocols that they have in it. So yeah, those would be the kind of things you're doing before you are assured that the data you're collecting are good.
Those are all really great tips. Thank you so much for sharing all those different pieces. We have one more question in the discussion forum about software applications or programming languages that you'd recommend using to plot and analyze data. I know there's been a lot of work for the last couple of years creating packages for this sort of work. So do you have a preferred platform that you use or something that you recommend for someone who's perhaps a little bit new to this field?
Yeah, if you are new and if you enjoy programming, I would steer you towards an open source programming language like Python because it's free and because there is a whole community of practice online using it. And when you have a question, you just Google your question and you're likely to find the answer. There's also a pretty robust community too when it comes to MATLAB and R, which are other popular software packages. So, those are a good option too. For me, as a US federal employee, MATLAB wants to charge me $3,000 a year for it. So I have long since moved to Python. And there's always like the good and trusty Excel when you just need to get a little bit of data in a spreadsheet and you need to do a quick plot or a quick assessment. Excel is always a good tool there. It just starts to break down once you really start looking at a lot of data.
Those are all excellent resources. Thank you for sharing that. I personally like R. It's been great to be able to Google things and get quick answers. And there's been, like you said, a lot of work in these different programming languages to build communities and work together on this, which is really wonderful to see. I have one last question, unless we get any others in the chat. But we're talking about examining trends over time, or like being able to look at our data and see something that looks a little bit out of place. So I'm curious to hear, back when you started this, obviously you have a lot of expertise and can probably pick things out easier than a lot of us who are just looking at it for the first time. What is your process for gaining familiarity with a new site, for example, that perhaps has unfamiliar dynamics to you, or other ways that you would recommend folks get up to speed and start being able to be more familiar with their environment? Is there a certain number of like a time frame for you when you're really comfortable in being able to pick out trends at a site?
Yeah, great question. I guess I've done a number of things. So if we are deploying a new buoy in a new location, I will usually do a big literature search and I'll just try and read all the papers that are from that region to kind of understand, at least get a lay of the current understanding of that, the dynamics controlling that region. So that's the first thing. The second thing is I ask a lot of questions. The good thing about reading those papers is then you have a lot of names and a lot of emails of people that know something about that region, and you should not hesitate to ask them. Scientists love love getting asked questions about their research, and don't be shy, because that is really the best way to start understanding a region, is just to find other people who also are doing work there and ask them questions. And maybe you'll find someone who's willing to look at your data and help you with your data, or maybe they've collected some data that they haven't published yet that would be useful for your process. So there's a lot of opportunities there. I think Go-On's peer-to-peer network is also great for that. So if you have a specific need where you want to work on data QC over the next year, reach out to that program and say, please find me a mentor that can just help me through this process, because that again, just learning from other people who have done it, I think is very efficient. And then lastly, I work on a lot of time series. So and long-term sustained time series. So we typically like to collect 2 or 3 years of data when we are new to a site, just to kind of get the sense for the variability there. And so that's really helpful if you have a program where you have sustained observing, and you're looking at your data and there are a lot of gaps and it's hard to interpret. Maybe you just need to wait another year and collect more data. So yeah, those are the things I would suggest.
Excellent. That's really helpful to hear, especially the peer-to-peer program mention, I think is important. We've heard about many benefits of joining Go-On, but here at the Ocean Foundation, we're really proud of our support of this program. And we've seen so many wonderful mentor-mentee relationships come out of it. And is really a nice way to build connections around the globe. All right, so we are wrapping up at the top of the hour. I want to give a chance for anyone else to drop their questions in the chat or raise their hand. Feel free to do so right now.
I just wanted to say sorry that I had so many connection issues.
No apologies necessary. I think we're all very familiar with the challenges that arise. Perfect. Well, thank you both for joining us. Greatly appreciate your expertise. It's been wonderful to not only watch the lectures this week, but hear from you in person. Just a reminder for everyone on the call, make sure to complete your quizzes for both of these modules by the end of the week on Sunday, because that will count towards your completion certificates. The reading material for Module 3 is online now as well, so you can make sure you check that off as done. And you'll hear from me again this weekend with what's coming up in our next week, which we're really excited to be getting into some experimentation with Sam DuPont and talking about laboratory experiments. So thank you again to everyone joining, and we'll see you next week.
Bye. Take care, everybody. Good luck. See you.
Bye-bye.